just to sum up, we do believe, the Conservatives do believe that the Commissioner acted against the public interest when she shared the confidential information about the weapons involved in the Nova Scotia mass murder with government. She did this against expert advice. She acted inappropriately and allowed the separation of powers between government and the RCMP to become weakened. She seemed to have a tone of eagerness to please the government rather than act as a check on power, and certainly the Government of Canada and all our institutions are built on checks and balances, and the separation of powers between the RCMP Commissioner and the Government of Canada is critical and imperative to maintaining our democratic process. We also believe the Liberal government took advantage of the Commissioner's attitude, most notably Minister Blair, who is very aware that the top of a police organization is supposed to be a strong barrier to political interference by government. Having been a chief of police himself, he would be well aware of this. He would also know that the closeness and eagerness of Commissioner Lucki to do the bidding of his government was inappropriate, but took advantage despite that knowledge and his experience. We do believe it is critical that the investigation continue. Unfortunately, we have seen some resistance to that today. You would have seen that as well from Liberal members of this committee. We are pleased to see that we will be meeting again on this, but there was no commitment to bring forward more witnesses. In particular, there seems to be one particular political staff at the center of this that we have yet to hear from, and that is Zita Astrovitz. She is the Chief of Staff to Minister Blair, was the Chief of Staff to him during his time as Public Safety Minister during the Nova Scotia mass murder. And she seems to have been the chief liaison between the RCMP and the government. And so we do believe it is imperative that we hear from her. We also listed, as you would have seen in committee, a number of other individuals who have yet to hear from. Again, the Liberal members of the committee have committed to transparency, as has the Minister Blair and the government. So we would encourage them in the next number of weeks before committee to ensure that they are in full preparation to ensure that all political staff that acted as liaisons between the RCMP and the government come to committee and be forthcoming and transparent so that we can have a fulsome investigation. Conservative members are firm that we do believe that political staff, when they're at the heart of an investigation like this, that it is imperative that they do come and be held accountable as they are public servants. So thank you very much and happy to take your questions.
Is it concerning just the proof on the political interference? I understand that there's concerning things about the discussion that the Commissioner had with subordinates about releasing the types of guns to the public knowledge. But from the testimony of Commissioner Lucki, she felt that her words were misrepresented or misunderstood by Superintendent Campbell. Today, Superintendent Campbell was asked, did you ask follow-up questions? Did you confirm that she'd been told directly by the minister? Because the minister denies, the government denies, and the Commissioner Lucki denies that there's political interference. And I'm not sure that there was much corroborating the political interference aspect of this today within the Commissioner. It's the Superintendent, his testimony.
It was interesting that in Commissioner Lucki's testimony a few weeks ago that she made it seem that this meeting that she called, or that Commissioner Brennan, or Deputy Commissioner Brennan called on her behalf, that infamous meeting that we're talking about, she made it seem that it was more about just general miscommunication, that she wasn't happy with the communications from the Nova Scotia RCMP. But today we heard quite firmly and quite clearly from Mr. Campbell that the meeting was in full about the issue of the weapon information being released, that was the purpose of this meeting. It was specifically tied by the Commissioner to the pending gun control legislation, or the OAC as we know it was now.
Right, but the ask from government, the political interference, maybe I can't see it, but I'm just trying to find the proof. Because you're just saying that there's political interference. So where's the connection? Because you have the minister denying that there was ever an order and ask. The commissioner is saying that she never promised it, and that she didn't tell them that she promised it.
Well, she did say, so just to dial back a little bit, so it was interesting because in the last committee meeting there was conflicting testimony from Minister Blair and Commissioner Lucki, and we've provided that video evidence as well since then, where Minister Blair said he had no awareness that Commissioner Lucki's expectation was that the weapons information would be released on the April 28th. Commissioner Lucki directly refuted that by saying that it was Minister Blair himself that asked her if that information was going to be released on the 28th, and she confirmed to him.
But she didn't promise it. We're parsing words here, but I know it's important. She thinks she looks like she's not in control of the information to someone in government. But the issue of the promise, the political interference, Right,
So
I'm sorry that I'm
I
repeating this,
think
but
it's
I
an
want to
important
understand.
question, actually. So what seems to be a running theme here is that the government and the RCMP headquarters seem to say that everything that we're talking about is just a simple miscommunication. I find that very, very convenient. We also heard that from the Department of Justice today. So those who have an interest to the public, or have an interest that this isn't viewed as political interference to the public, are saying, oh, don't worry, it was just a simple miscommunication. I think there's 3 or 4 of those miscommunications now. But what we heard from Campbell and Scanlon very, very clearly as well, that was corroborated in other notes from other RCMP officials that we've had, that this meeting was specifically about the weapons info not being released, and that Commissioner felt it was imperative because she had promised or confirmed or was pressured by the Minister and the Prime Minister's office that that information would be released so that it could be leveraged to pass or to further the government's gun control agenda.
You agree that there's a difference between confirmed and pressured, right?
Well, when we asked the Commissioner, we grilled her quite a bit, you may remember about that, and she said, well, I didn't mean promise in a conventional way.
Right.
So I'll allow others to decide if they think that that is a transparent way to respond to that. I find it very unusual.
But isn't the issue that there's a lot of assumptions around the political interference? Like maybe it's a different question about the guns, but I've just put the political interference, that if there's direct pressure from the government.
I think it would be odd, nonetheless, regardless if it was a promise that she said or confirmed, it would be odd that given the Commissioner is well aware that releasing this information this early on in the investigation could have jeopardized that investigation. Nonetheless, she shared that information with the government. The Minister of Public Safety at the time was also aware, and he said in committee, oh, I would never push to have something like that released if it would jeopardize. And yet we know that him, or perhaps it was his Chief of Staff, Zita Astrovez, it was a bit unclear, asked the Commissioner, is this information going to be released? Despite knowing that if it was, it could jeopardize it. And despite knowing that that information being released could jeopardize the investigation, the Commissioner Lucki responded to the Minister of Public Safety or his office staff, Zita Astrovez, that yes, it will be. And then she was deeply, deeply upset when it was not. So much so that she called sort of an unprecedented meeting that, as you saw today, had an incredible emotional impact on those involved at the Nova Scotia RCMP. Nonetheless, it was inappropriate, and the motivation there for her to do that, I think, is very suspect.
Is your conclusion, based on everything you've heard so far, that there was political interference? Like, do you feel convinced at this point that there absolutely was?
I would say that given the testimony is quite conflicting, we don't believe the Minister of Public Safety or the former Minister of Public Safety when he said. We saw the conflicting testimony he provided with Commissioner Lucki just last few weeks ago, where he said, no, I had no idea Commissioner Lucki had that expectation, whereas Commissioner Lucki made it clear that he did know. So someone is lying, and that's why we do believe that clearly there was some sort of inappropriate pressure. And certainly the Commissioner, we believe, also acted inappropriately, and it would seem that the Liberal government took advantage of that.
So then, as a follow-up to that, where's the accountability piece for you? What should the consequence be for the fact that there was political interference, in your view, that was inappropriate?
We don't feel that asking for the resignation of Commissioner Lucki or Minister Blair is off the table, but we do need to hear more testimony from those involved. Again, Zita Astrovez seems to be the chief liaison between the RCMP, Minister Blair, and the communication process here. So it would be odd, it would not be a fulsome investigation until we heard from the political staff that seemed to have played a very senior and important role in making decisions here.
Campbell seemed to be taking aim at who Brenda Lucki is as a police officer, as the top Mountie, that in his view that she would kind of value the legislation over the investigation. That's maybe I'm understanding, that seems to be a pretty, goes to the heart of who she is. So are you saying that the Conservatives are willing to call for her resignation? Do you still have faith in her as the Commissioner?
We do need to hear from more witnesses. We don't believe that this is complete. Again, there are a lot of unanswered questions. We have not heard from everyone who's had their hands in those days following in the communications flow. So that's why we'd like to hear from everyone. Asking for someone's resignation, as you know, is very, very serious. And so we want to make sure we hear from every person who touched this during those days that determined what was being communicated and what was not. We need to hear from everyone. And it is a bit of a drip, drip, drip in committee, trying to pull sort of who was being talked to. So we are going to continue trying. That's why we tried to move a motion today that invited a number of more people. Unfortunately, the Liberals were not very keen on that, but we do have another committee meeting coming up where we'll discuss next steps.
You and your colleagues have talked a lot about this issue with CERT, which was raised by Chief Superintendent Leather last week. I spoke with the Commissioner, the leader of CERT, who was really clear that he did not have within his purview the right or the ability to make directives to the RCMP, and that the weapons at issue were not a part of his investigation at all. Why are you so worried about this cert thing if he's saying this didn't happen?
I appreciate your work on that as well. I did see that article. I think that's actually a really good question. So we have conflicting advice. We've heard in 2 committee meetings now that CERT does have quite a bit of oversight authority and was of the expert opinion that this information should be released. I then saw what you're referring to, and I was surprised to see that. So it's another reason why we would like to hear from CERT and hear directly from them as well in the public forum that is committee to get some clarification. I think it's a very good question.
Is it clear that the notion that the commissioner came into this investigation and basically told subordinates you have to release the guns and the types of guns, while you say the criminal investigation's ongoing, and the superintendent says, well, this could jeopardize the investigation. Is that alone just perhaps a reason to call for Commissioner Lucki's resignation?
Sorry, can you just repeat that? Just so
Yeah, no, it's okay. I got lost myself.
Okay.
The fact that it seems Brenda Lucki has admitted to saying, hey, I want these guns, and I told the government that we would report the guns publicly.
She also said the government asked her if it would be.
Okay. And that's where that's the political interference thing, and I understand that, but I do think that it's pretty concrete that she asked for investigators to do something that could have jeopardized her criminal investigation. Is that
And she seemed to have tied it.
clear?
She seems to have tied that as well in the April 28th meeting, that she had, quote, promised or confirmed or was pressured. There's slightly different accounts of exactly the language she used, but certainly she indicated that she'd made a strong commitment to government that this would be released, and that was important because they were going to use that or leverage it for their upcoming gun control.
But from a law enforcement perspective, is that, shouldn't there have been standards or something like that?
So we've heard
You know
from...
what I mean? I understand the language around what she used is tied to the political interference, but I'm trying to ask if it's abundantly clear right now that the commissioner of the RCMP could have jeopardized a criminal investigation, whether there's interference or not. Is this not a reason to call for the commissioner's resignation?
We do think it's quite serious. That's why we haven't left off the table. If we will be asking for her resignation, as I mentioned in my opening comments. I am not an RCMP official. I don't think anyone here is. I don't have any policing experience, but we have heard today from Darren Campbell, who has had multiple commissioners and deputy commissioners of the RCMP vouch for his integrity, who has confirmed that in his perspective, it wasn't appropriate that she was doing that. So again, we need to hear from more witnesses before we make that call, but it's not off the table to ask for her resignation.
Given that there are 2 kind of views of what that meeting was like, 2 very different but entrenched views, they haven't really moved all that much. And you've already said, some people are going to interpret the words differently. So realistically, do you think the committee can find the definitive, yes, this is political interference? Where is it?
Right. I think when we've heard from everyone who's had their hands in this, then we can make a final decision of what we would like to see happen at government to hold them accountable, whether that's the resignation of Commissioner Lucki that we would ask for, the resignation of Minister Blair, or perhaps the political staff. I mean, nothing is off the table, but we do feel that clearly something very inappropriate happened here, and this is to deal with, the lives of people, like 22 people that were murdered. And to think, and the allegation being made is that the Liberal government saw that as an opportunity to further their agenda. And that's very, very serious, and that the commissioner went against her own expertise and the expertise of others, that releasing this information would be worth it, even if it jeopardized the criminal investigation. Again, this was not months after, this was within days, and they are working with the American government, several different levels of government in our country as well. Pretty significant that just days after people were murdered, that someone would take advantage of that to pass a political agenda. It just seems very inappropriate, frankly, very crass. And so we would like to hear from everyone. We need to hear from a few more people, particularly those at the center that we have not heard from. Again, it seems that political staff here, Minister Blair's office, played a central role in that. We do believe they should be held accountable and come testify before the public.
Just to play devil's advocate, it's not a unanimous opinion that releasing that information would have jeopardized the investigation. In fact, there are a lot of people who say that that has no bearing on the investigation, what type of guns were used.
Who mentioned that? Sorry.
I've heard from policing experts, and I would refer you also to the fact that police in the United States frequently release the type of guns within hours of these types of events having happened. So because it was Commissioner Lucki's call that gave this information, she obviously did make her own call to give this information to the government. Is it possible that she within her own expertise, made a different determination than Chief Superintendent Campbell?
We did provide her the opportunity to make that argument last time, and she did not. I would say as well that Darren Campbell and others in Nova Scotia were of the firm opinion that it would jeopardize the investigation, that it could. Again, this is days into it. They're speaking with the American government and with others. It seems inappropriate that they would need that, particularly to leverage it for political gain. And at the end of the day, this information was not released publicly until the fall.
And at the end of the day, no charges were ever laid in the commission in helping the gunman obtain these weapons. So does that matter? Do the facts of this case, the way that it's actually played out, the fact that there was no ultimate charge laid against anybody who helped him, doesn't that matter in terms of whether or not it might have jeopardized an investigation? We're speaking in hypotheticals, but...
I think we've heard in testimony that the expert opinion overall was that that would have jeopardized the investigation, having released that information that early on.
But the expert opinion from Nova Scotia RCMP, who obviously hold that belief because Chief Superintendent Campbell holds that belief.
You may want to ask Commissioner Lucki
Sure.
that question.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Maybe I can just
Please.
jump in, if you don't mind, on a different topic, since you're here in the waning days of your party's leadership race, and you've chosen to remain neutral. And so I just wonder if you could give your sort of neutral assessment of how it's gone, what you're looking forward to for the fall, why you've chosen to remain neutral. And your take.
That's a great question. Well, I would say that I've spoken to all the leadership candidates that remain in the race, and those that remain in the race, I have great respect for them. I think that our party is in good hands if any of them are elected. It seems that the front runners, as we know, seem to be Mr. Polyev and Mr. Charest. I have great respect for their work. I think it's clear that there's been different visions articulated and tones by those two leading candidates. And I would like to see whoever the leader is meet the moment of today. I have a lot of constituents that are on very fixed incomes. Inflation is hitting them hard. We know that massive deficit spending means more money in the economy. Chasing fewer goods means higher prices. So we need someone who's able to hold the government to account. I think the two leading men, and frankly all of the candidates, would do a good job of that. But certainly my expectation is that whoever wins brings the party together. I think that that should be the focus of all MPs, regardless of who they endorse, as well as all EDAs, all party members, all organizers on all campaigns. I would ask that they all, on that election night, when we determine who the leader is, come together and publicly state their support for that leader, and that we come together as a team and hit the ground running. We have this issue to deal with and considerable issues to deal with, notably inflation, housing. We can go on and on of the issues and failures of the Liberal government. So there's no time to waste. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.